Think about the last meal you ate. Maybe it was chicken, maybe a burger, maybe something with pork. You probably just chose it. You walked past it in the store or picked it off the menu, and that was that. But here's what's strange. You didn't actually choose anything. Every single animal on your plate was selected thousands of years ago by people you will never meet, in places you have never been. And there is one animal, huge, surprisingly delicious, and terrifyingly dangerous, that almost made it onto that list. An animal that was nearly mass farmed across American rivers. An animal that the United States government once seriously, officially debated raising as your primary source of meat. An animal that came within one congressional vote of becoming as normal as the hot dog. The hippo. And the reason you have never eaten one has almost nothing to do with how dangerous they are. Stay with me until the very end, because the last part completely changes how you think about every single meal you have ever eaten, and about how much of your own life was actually chosen by you. Let's start with the obvious answer, because you've already thought of it. Hippos are enormous. They are aggressive. They are completely unpredictable. They kill an estimated 500 people every year in Africa, more than lions, more than leopards, more than crocodiles. They weigh up to 4,000 kilograms. Their teeth grow up to 50 centimeters long. They can sprint at 30 kilometers per hour on land. And in water, they vanish completely. They can hold their breath for 5 minutes. They can walk along the bottom of a river without surfacing. The thing about to flip your boat is invisible until it is directly underneath you. So yes, dangerous. But here's the thing about that answer. It doesn't actually explain anything, because dangerous has never stopped humans from eating something. We have hunted whales across open ocean. We have trapped bears in their dens. We have eaten sharks, alligators, and giant tortoises. Our ancestors ate woolly mammoths, cave bears, animals twice the size of a hippo. Danger has never been a deal breaker for our species. Ever. So what's really going on here? The real answer starts much earlier than you'd expect. It starts on a river. And it starts with a species that used to be absolutely everywhere. Close your eyes and picture the Nile. Not the modern one, the ancient one. It is not the quiet waterway you might imagine. It is loud, it is crowded, and it is full of hippos. Not dozens, not hundreds, tens of thousands of them. Every bend, every slow stretch of water, every muddy bank. Hippos, as far as you can see. They graze the fields at night. They capsize fishing boats by accident just by surfacing. They are woven into Egyptian life so completely that the ancient Egyptians had a goddess shaped like one. Her name was Taweret. She was the goddess of fertility and protection. She had the body of a hippo, the tail of a crocodile, and the paws of a lion. The ancient Egyptians didn't just worship hippos, they ate them, enthusiastically. Hippo meat appears throughout ancient Egyptian records. Hippo hunting was considered one of the bravest things a pharaoh could do. Wall carvings from thousands of years ago show kings in reed boats, driving spears into hippos from above. The fat was rendered down and eaten. The meat was described as rich and dense. Historians believe it tasted somewhere between beef and pork, a heavy, satisfying protein. In fact, the Egyptians were so good at hunting hippos that they hunted them nearly to extinction along the entire Nile, a species that had lived in that river for millions of years, removed in a matter of centuries. Not because they were impossible to kill, but because they were too good to eat to stop. By around 800 AD, hippos had vanished from Lower Egypt entirely. By the late 1800s, they were gone from most of North Africa. The people who built the pyramids once ate hippos for dinner, so the idea that we can't eat them isn't ancient wisdom. It isn't even really a tradition. It is something we forgot, and it's what makes what happened in 1910 so fascinating. The year is 1910. The United States has a problem, two problems actually. The first is meat. The American population is booming. Cities are expanding. Demand for beef and pork is growing faster than farms can supply. Prices are climbing. Major newspapers are running headlines about a national meat crisis. There is a real fear that ordinary Americans will not be able to afford protein within a generation. The second problem is in the rivers of Louisiana. Water hyacinth, an ornamental plant from South America, had been introduced to the waterways of the American South. Accidentally at first, but then deliberately because it was beautiful, and then catastrophically. It was spreading at an impossible rate. Entire rivers were being choked, fish were dying, boats couldn't move. Local ecosystems were being strangled by a plant that had no natural enemy in North America. Nothing could stop it. Now imagine being a politician in 1910 staring at two disasters, not enough meat, and waterways being consumed by an unstoppable plant, when two very unusual men walk into your office. Frederick Russell Burnham was an American scout. A real one. He had spent years in Africa. He had survived battles, deserts, and jungles across 3 continents. He was considered one of the greatest outdoorsmen alive. Fritz Duquesne was a South African soldier of fortune, a hunter, a spy, a man who had operated in more dangerous situations than most people could imagine. Together, they had a proposal: import hippos into the bayous of Louisiana. The hippos, they argued, would eat the water hyacinth. They would clear the rivers. Problem 1 solved. Then humans would eat the hippos. Problem 2 solved. They even had a name for the meat. They called it lake cow bacon. They wrote articles. They gave speeches in Washington. They got a senator from Louisiana, Robert Broussard, to formally sponsor the bill. It was called the American Hippo Bill. It proposed $250,000 in federal funding to import and establish hippo farming in American waterways. And the American press largely supported it. Scientific American ran coverage calling the idea worth serious consideration. The New York Times wrote about it without mockery. Ecologists weighed in. Agricultural experts were consulted. Think about what that means. In a version of history that nearly happened, hippo ranches would exist in Louisiana right now. Hippo burgers would be on menus. Lake cow bacon might be in your refrigerator. The bill failed, but only barely. Political momentum shifted. Other priorities took over. The bill died in committee, never reaching a full vote. And just like that, the hippo's chance at the American table was gone. But here's the question that nobody asks after that story. Even if the bill had passed, would it have worked? Because here's the part about hippos that Burnham and Duquesne, for all their experience, may not have fully thought through. You cannot tame a hippo, not truly. People have tried. In Uganda, a man raised a hippo named Mzee from a calf, fed it by hand, let it sleep near his home. It followed him like a large, barrel-shaped dog. It came when he called. Then one day, without any visible trigger, it killed him. That is not an isolated story. Hippos raised in captivity around humans from birth will tolerate people for years. Sometimes for decades, they seem calm, almost gentle. And then something shifts. Some territorial instinct fires that no amount of hand feeding ever managed to reach, and they attack with a force that no human can survive. You cannot train that out of them through handling. You cannot remove it through kindness or conditioning, and you cannot breed it out in a generation or two. The animals we actually farm successfully today, cattle, pigs, chickens, sheep, were domesticated over thousands of years. Thousands. Breeders selecting, generation after generation, for lower aggression, for calm behavior in confined spaces, for tolerance of human presence even in stressful conditions. That process reshaped those animals at a genetic level. Hippos never went through it. And here's what makes that more interesting than it sounds. About 10,000 years ago, our ancestors figured out farming. Before that, humans ate whatever they could catch. Hippos included, as we've already seen. But farming changed everything, and farming animals is much, much harder than farming plants. To farm an animal successfully, it has to meet a very specific set of requirements. It has to survive on food that is cheap and easy to grow. Grass, grain, scraps. It has to grow fast enough that the time and resources invested in raising it are worth the return. It has to be willing to breed in captivity. Many animals simply refuse. It cannot be so dangerous that it routinely kills the farmers. And this is the one that gets overlooked. It has to have a social hierarchy that humans can exploit. Cows follow dominant bulls. Horses follow led mares. Sheep follow the flock. Dogs follow the pack leader. Humans can insert themselves into those hierarchies. They can become the leader. And once the animal accepts you as dominant, the whole relationship becomes workable. Hippos have social structures. Males are deeply territorial. Females protect their young fiercely. There are hierarchies, but they operate on a level of aggression that makes human integration nearly impossible. You cannot convince a hippo that you outrank it. You can only convince a hippo that you are a threat. So out of the hundreds of large mammals that existed 10,000 years ago, humans successfully domesticated exactly 14 species. 14 out of hundreds. Cattle, sheep, goats, pigs, horses, donkeys, Bactrian camels, dromedary camels, llamas, alpacas, reindeer, water buffalo, yaks, and one species of Southeast Asian cattle called Bali cattle. That's it. The rest of the animal kingdom was biologically disqualified from the list. Not because our ancestors didn't want to eat them, not because they didn't try, but because of tiny mismatches. In temperament, in diet, in breeding behavior, in social structure, that made domestication impossible at the scale farming required. Hippos lost on almost every criterion. Too aggressive, too dangerous, too territorial, too slow to breed, too difficult to confine, too expensive to feed. A near miss on every single count. Here's where it gets stranger, because the hippo experiment actually did run, just not in Louisiana. In the 1980s, Pablo Escobar, the Colombian drug lord, built a private zoo at his estate called Hacienda Nápoles. He imported 4 hippos, 1 male, and 3 females. When Colombian authorities killed Escobar in 1993 and seized his properties, the hippos were left behind. They were too dangerous and too expensive to move. The government tried to find zoos to take them. Most refused. So the hippos stayed. They wandered out. They found rivers. The Colombian climate, warm and wet, suited them perfectly. They had no natural predators. Nothing in South America evolved to kill a hippo. They bred and bred. Today, Colombia has more than 130 feral hippos living in the Magdalena River basin. Scientists project that without intervention, that number could reach 1,500 by 2050. They are already altering the chemistry of rivers. They excrete enormous amounts of waste into the water, disrupting oxygen levels. They are displacing native species. They are spreading bacteria that Colombian ecosystems were never built to handle. Ecologists have called them a slow-motion ecological disaster. One man's abandoned zoo, one drug lord's private collection. That is now Colombia's biggest wildlife management crisis, and it is the closest thing the world has ever had to the American Hippo Bill actually running. The results are not encouraging. So let's come back to your meal. The chicken, the beef, the pork, you didn't choose those. History chose them for you. The animals on your plate are the 14 winners of a biological lottery that was drawn 10,000 years ago. They happen to have the right temperament, the right diet, the right social structure, the right breeding behavior. And because they won that lottery, they spread across the world with the humans who domesticated them. Every society that adopted those 14 species gained an enormous advantage. More food, more labor, more materials, and something darker, more disease. And then crucially, more immunity to those diseases. The civilizations built on those 14 animals grew faster, built bigger cities, and eventually spread further than any culture that hadn't made that same jump. The food you grew up eating isn't neutral. It isn't random. It is the inheritance of 10,000 years of one very specific biological accident. The hippo almost made the list. It has the meat. The ancient Egyptians proved that. It has the numbers. It was everywhere. But it had the wrong temperament by a few degrees, the wrong instincts by a few million years of evolution, the wrong social structure to ever let humans stand at the top. And because of that, every version of hippo farming that humans ever attempted, from the ancient Nile to the Louisiana bayous to Pablo Escobar's backyard, either collapsed or became a disaster. Not because the hippo is inedible, but because the hippo, through no fault of its own, is unyielding. It simply refuses to be owned. There are about 115,000 hippos left in the world today. The species is classified as vulnerable to extinction, the same animal that once crowded every bend of the Nile, the same animal that almost became standard American livestock, the the same animal now spreading unchecked through Colombian rivers with no predator to stop it. Its story keeps folding back on itself. Too abundant, then nearly gone, then almost farmed, then feral, then endangered, and through all of it, the hippo remained exactly what it has always been: untamable. Here is the thing that stays with me. You have eaten thousands of meals in your life. You probably never thought about why the options looked the way they did, why it was always chicken, beef, or pork, why it was never hippo, zebra, or buffalo. You assumed that was just how it is, but how it is was decided in specific moments, by specific people through a combination of biology and history and accident. A pharaoh's hunting trip, a congressman's vote, a drug lord's menagerie, a dozen generations of farmers breeding for calm. Every meal you've ever eaten carries all of that. The animals that made it onto your plate won a lottery they didn't know they were entering, and the ones that didn't, some of them are wandering rivers in Colombia right now, running out of room, running out of time. You almost ate hippo. Someone, somewhere, decided you wouldn't, and you never even knew there was a decision to make.